Hey, what's up everyone? I hope you're doing fine. For this devlog, we will talk about the camera system and how we made the background. This will lead us to talk about how we polish the game a bit. The game is available on itch.io, by the way, where you can play it in your web browser. It has a save file, so if you leave the game, you'll still keep all your progression. It would be very appreciated if you give it a try. You just have to click on the link in the description. Well, enough of that, let's jump right into it. When we switched to Unity, I knew we could make something a bit more fancy than just a camera following you, especially because we can use Cinemachine in Unity. So we did that. We used Cinemachine with a state-driven camera and a Cinemachine brain. It handles two movements, basically. We either swap between camera or we pan inside a camera. The way I did that is that I made a camera manager that would take an array of camera and it would handle all the movement we just talked about. It also handles another movement, by the way. It's the camera following the player when it falls. But this type of movement is the same for every camera. Here's what I'm describing. When the player is at a certain location, we made it so that the camera would pan to suggest a certain direction. We decided not to have a lot of highlighted path and a big arrow or stuff like that, but the way we highlight path in the game is more with a suggestion of movement with the movement of the camera and also a bit of the light. We'll go back to that. So basically, the panning is simply a lerp between the player position and a slightly further position that we can set. The swap between camera is made from left to right or right to left. The way we swap camera is by enabling a camera and disabling a camera. The thing is that we use a Cinemachine brain where we can put a state-driven blend in. The state-driven blend is basically a rule to say how you're going to swap between camera. So instead of having just a simple cut, there I can handle the lerp between two camera. Let's say to make it simple in this map, it's the same movement between each camera when we swap between each camera. The thing that's cool is that now we kind of have a system with the camera, and because we use Cinemachine, we can then do some stuff like screen shake very easily. We just have to create an impulse, which is like some sort of noise pattern. In 2D, we only care about moving X and Y position. We didn't even move the rotation or anything. It was enough to make a screen shake. So we can really make kind of a random pattern in like 2 seconds. And all we have to do after is make a little shake screen script, and as you can see in like 2 lines of code, we just made the script generate, like listen and generate to the noise we just made. Once we have camera set up in the game, we have to make a background. Of course, we use tileset to create the platform and some close-up object that we put on the foreground and background of the player. But that's pretty straightforward, except for maybe some one-way platform that we could talk another time. But when I talk about background, I talk more about the large object and the big background that covers the map. We don't use tiles for those one. We use multiple layers to create the background and use parallax script to move the layer individually at different speed and direction. Okay, we do that because most of the big 2D platformer Souls-like game, they usually have beautiful background with a big sense of depth, but you also want to have some location, like static location, where you have a sick thing, you know, like in the prologue map, which is the map right after the tutorial. We can see that as we move, we have a lot of depth, but we also have some objects that are static in the map. This is like easily achieved with the multiple layer I just described, because we have some layer that we can put a parallax that moves, and we have some layer we can just not put parallax that move. Now that we have a camera system that swaps between zone, it can feel like the player is exploring separate zone inside a big area. Like if you see at that map, I have multiple zone with multiple background that looks different, and they all move independently, but because the player can only see one zone at a time, it doesn't like break the illusion, you know? It's mostly what we call the camera cheat, because like you see here, you know, if the camera was bigger, we might see a bit of the background. Once we have the background with our moving and depth layer and our source static location, the lighting in our game is also an important thing. It has to blend with the background. Because the game is called Underworld, it is set in a dark and gloomy tone. So we use the light to illuminate certain area, which allows us to keep a darker global light in the scene. So it has a bit more, like I said, of a dark tone, but we have some big light that flashes to illuminate some area, but also it's used to direct the player. Just like the camera movement we saw, the lighting gives a sense of movement to the player in the map. Like we can see in the map prologue, that's the first map of the tutorial we were in. If I zoom out, we can kind of see that all the light has the same angle, directing the player towards the right side of the map to keep it moving. And the light is pretty simple. We use the light 2D script from Unity, and we either put a point light or a freeform light. After that, we really only play with the light color, the intensity, and the layering. The light is already additive when you layer it with the script. So for example, in this map, which is the tutorial, we can create the following effect by layering a white light behind the player that doesn't interact with the player sprite. And we can layer the color light in front of the player that interacts with the player sprite. We can also tweak the fallout on the script, but it really just gives us a sharp edge or a blurry edge, which we use for a different light to give a different vibe. And sometimes I also use a custom script to give a more cinematic look to the light. All I do in those cases is start a coroutine to fade the light in and out, like in this map. Even with the background and the light that we set up, we're still missing a little thing to make the light pop and to make the world feel a bit less flat. It is what we would call post-processing. It's usually made in the global volume in Unity, but before we do that, I also did another little trick. I add a shader that's a white outline around the sprite, and I add a light behind the game object, and it lights up the edge, the outline that I made, kind of the same color as the light. So if you walk in the map and another light shines over your player, it will also kind of take that color for the outline. And after that, we go into the global volume, and to make the lights pop, we have to do kind of two little things. We add some color adjustment. Here we did like color aberration and color adjustment, but really you do whatever you want. We're just trying to set a dark tone. And after we add a bloom, so that the light really starts to shine when it overlaps with the player. We also added a film grain to give a more gloomy and oldie look, but that's just post-processing. You can start adding whatever you want. Another thing we did to really give the polished finish to the game is that we add some particle system in the map, like some twinkles, some dust, or some falling leaves. To help tie in the whole game together, I also wanted to add a small story, and I decided to make the cutscenes as webcomic because I love to read webcomic, and also both me and my brother are not animators, so it seemed like a great solution to have cutscene in that way. I started by writing the script. Basically, we have the Underworld Dark Force and a kind of high-tech drifter who's like a glitch samurai fighting the Underworld. So the story kind of explained the aesthetic of the game and where it comes from, where these people come from and the war comes from. After that, to make the cutscene itself, I used a tool called -2. It's a webcomic editor that allows me to composite image on a page. Full disclosure, it is an AI tool. I am not an artist and I do not have the money to pay one, so the art are mostly generated image, and I rework them a little bit with their tool. Like I redrawn some of the samurai during the war part of the intro so that they are more consistent. Whatever. I also use their tool to separate my character in the background so I can layer the onomatopoeia and the bubble speech in a cool way. And I also added a gradient color so the background of the page fit with the vibe of the webcomic. All that together, it made it possible for me to make a full webcomic on my own. Without that, the game kind of would just not have a cutscene, so that's pretty cool. Once we have those cutscenes, we have all the page of the comics, we have to import it to Unity and make a comic reader. Basically, my comic reader takes the size of the webcomic it will play and make a bound to encapsulate the whole thing, like you can see here. That way, first off, when we take the player input, the webcomic can only scroll up and down to its size in the camera. And also, no matter the length of my webcomic, because we have a couple of cutscenes in the game, either they're 2-page, 3-page, 4-page, the webcomic is just a game object and it will take the size of the webcomic. So we can reuse the same script without tweaking too much. We also had a button so the player can leave the cutscene when he's done reading, of course. And that's pretty much all we do. We check the player input and we scroll the webcomic. The game object of the webcomic is just the page that we set up in the right order, and we can add some blending stuff. Here I have like something to make a border, so I just use a big black rectangle and I add a mask to only cover the side, and I sometimes also add some color slice in between the page to make them blend better, because I don't know why, but sometimes in Unity it has a little skill. And after that, we just have to repeat the process for each cutscene, and we use the same script, like I said. The rest of the webcomic reader script is just to tell which comic to play and save which cutscene, which comic has been played, so we don't replay them. But we'll not go into detail on this one because it's more part of our save system than the web comic reader, and it could be a full video on its own. Okay, so matter of fact, let us know in the comment if you'd like us to show you our saving system. We have a full save manager and a way to save it in the player pref. And yeah, just let us know in the comment, we'll make another devlog. So that's gonna be it for this one. To summarize and wrap things up, we basically covered the camera system and how we make the background, which led us to talk about polishing the game with a post-processing to have a very finished look, and also how we add a story and made a webcomic to have like original cutscene to our game. So that's gonna be it. Thanks for everyone. Don't forget, you can play the game by clicking on the link in the description. Leave a feedback, it really helps us in our journey. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.